Hi, I'm Jennifer DeBon, and I did my book review on Watching Women's Liberation, 1970 by Bonnie J. Dow. Um, she actually starts the book out in 1968, not 1970, like the title would suggest. Uh, and she starts it out explaining how hundreds of women gathered to protest the Miss America pageant. The group that worked on the protest was New York Radical Women. The women threw their bras into trash cans, which later started the bra burning myth. Women never burned their bras. That would just be wasteful, and bras are very expensive. Dow tells us that despite many cameras being present at the pageant, no television networks actually showed the story. Only newspaper outlets ran the story. We are told that television networks didn't show the women's movement until over a year and a half later in 1970. Because of this, 1970 was the year that women's liberation set off. Dow explains that the three main television networks ran over 20 reports that year about the movement. ABC even made a half-an-hour documentary. She explains how media and the social movement were interdependent on one another. Dow explains the norms of news media and how they are attracted to stories with drama, deviance, and human interest. They like to run stories that happened during business hours that week. On the second chapter, Dow refers to an article in the New York Times from 1969 where they referenced reactions to the Miss America pageant. There weren't many pleasant reactions to the protest. One stated, "Dear Ugly, what right have you to disrupt the Miss America pageant? What does a woman's looks have to do with the protest?" Honestly, we see this today, every day actually. Just look at the news for politics. When a woman is running for office, they are critiqued on their looks and often portrayed as a ball buster. We learned that because the written media followed the women's movement for so long prior to television media, the networks actually followed rather than led the stories. Chapter 3 of the book goes into detail about the takeover of RAT, which is a radical political newspaper controlled by white men. That takeover inspired a sit-in at Ladies' Home Journal. This prompted the larger women's magazines to incorporate women's liberation themes into their edition. Chapter 4 brought up Playboy magazine and how Hugh Hefner wrote a memo to staff stating, "These chicks are our natural enemy." I felt that this was a strong introduction to the chapter. We saw how ABC's documentary was advertised in TV Guide. They went into great detail about Marlene Sanders and her being a working mother. Yet the documentary did not mention Sanders' personal life. The documentary was meant to introduce to the audience the goals of the movement so that women's movement can be taken seriously. Yet another way for the media to kind of push aside the meaning of the women's movement. Chapter 5 went into detail about the political side of women's movement. How during that time that era was in the House, women were at the Statue of Liberty demonstrating. Chapter 6 explained why the early stories did not catch television attention. A CBS rep noted that they reported within the zone of deviance, meaning that radical ideology could be trivialized. We saw that CBS was taking into account their target audience, which was white men, and therefore the coverage of women's liberalism did not need to be respectful. Overall, I thought that Dow's book was pretty easy to read. I actually enjoyed reading, some of it. There were a few parts where I felt like, I've heard this before. You're just repeating, what I already know. But I did learn a few things, which was great. I mean, that's the whole aspect of this project. So thank you, and that was my book review.